Welcome back to Bleav in Softball. I'm your host, Jenna, and I don't know about you, but I am so excited that it's officially spring. There's a little more sun, which is nice, and I am sending good vibes to our weather warriors all over the country as softball season continues. So however you got here today, whether you downloaded the audio version on Apple, Spotify, etc., or you're watching on YouTube, thank you and welcome. You can subscribe and rate the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and X at Bleav in Softball. That's BLEAV. And there's merch. Click the link in our bio on either page or go to shop.bleav.com to purchase 3 different shirts available, covering our bases, safer out, and catch you soon. All right, let's go through today's batting order. First, we will be covering our bases. I'm going to share some call outs. Then we'll head into today's interview with Carol Hutchins, the GOAT. The winningest coach in college softball history, Hall of Famer, and just the perfect person to have on to help us wrap up Women's History Month. Then we'll bring it home and wrap up with some final thoughts. All right, let's go. Covering our bases. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for betting on all the madness. Even if your bracket is busted, BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the free Sweet 16 bracket and live betting on every remaining tournament game. With the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to MLB, NHL, and MMA, BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. And for us, Women's History Month is ending here shortly, even though we celebrate women's history all the time. But I had to just take a moment to reflect on this because recently I was thinking about just how cool it is that some college programs have been around for 50 plus years in the softball world. A few that come to mind immediately are Arizona, UCLA, Mizzou, Oklahoma, and I just wanted to give a shout out to those programs considering how incredible it is to have had sustained excellence like that and support of women's sports over that time period. So shout out to those athletic departments. Also, Oklahoma State did something pretty cool. They honored their 1975 team, which was, remember, barely after Title IX was passed. And current players actually surprised the alums this past weekend with Letterman jackets, finally, after all this time. And we even talked with Hutch today about her experience getting her AIAW national championship ring 20 years after they actually won it. Because remember, this was before NCAA sponsored softball and women's sports like they do now. So just so many things to be grateful for. And I think it's important to remember that the past informs the present, which paves the way for the future. So thank you to those who came before, those who are in it now, and those who will continue to impact our game as well as women and girls in sport. Had to start there, but also wanted to talk about this past weekend and what I was up to and share some thoughts. So actually, I told you guys last week, I had a very rare weekend off, a bye week, if you will, but I still somehow ended up at the softball field. But this time it was to watch my goddaughter play with her team, the Maroon Donuts. She's 7, so that was fun. We got to play catch, got to hang out, pretty much the ideal way to spend an off day. But of course, still a lot going on in college softball, and I was tuned in. Amanda Lorenz and I actually recap a lot of the action in this week's D1 Softball podcast, from Arkansas upsetting Tennessee and Oklahoma's first loss of the year to Missouri, Clemson and Ohio exploding offensively, a lot of movement in the Big 12, Cal State Northridge shocking the Big West, and plenty more. And speaking of that episode, we also actually interviewed Virginia Tech pitcher Emma Lemley. The Hokies have been on a solid top 15 contender trajectory this season. And she made noise when she threw back-to-back perfect games earlier this year. And by the way, now she's up to 4 no-hitters. So just great to hear from her, especially as a senior, reflecting back on her time. And then I also got Amanda's thoughts on the AUSL launching the largest pro softball marketing campaign ever, called This Is Legendary. She's actually a part of it, of course, and it's just the future of pro softball, and it's another part of Women's History Month. For us, I think, is how we can push forward to our future. So very cool. Check it out. Find it on D1 Softball's YouTube or download it wherever you get your pods for audio. Coming up this week, I will be calling men's volleyball this weekend. I actually called quite a few women's volleyball matches this past fall and even the year before. It's one of my favorite sports to call. outside of softball, so I'm excited to be on the men's side this time. Don't worry, I'm going to be calling 5 baseball and softball games the week after. So there's so much softball to watch in the meantime to get ready for that too. And I'm obviously especially going to have my eye on the Stanford Virginia Tech series. Of course, it's a ranked matchup, but it's also the last 2 podcast guests that I have had going head to head. Taryn Kern here on Bleav in Softball last week, and then of course Emma Lemley on D1 Softball podcasts this week. So softball never ends. But somebody who knows that better than anyone else is today's guest. So let's head into the interview. She was the Michigan head coach for 38 years, the winningest coach in NCAA softball history, including the 2005 NCAA National Championship, 18-time Big Ten Coach of the Year, 2-time National Coach of the Year, Michigan State alum and AIAW National Champion, and of course, multi-time Hall of Fame inductee Carol Hutchins. Hutch, thank you so much for doing this and for hopping on with me. I can't tell you how excited I am.
Well, I love to talk about all things, athletics and softball, and, it's definitely still my passion.
Yes, that's easy to see, I will say. I got to meet you briefly, of course, in person at the NFCA convention. But before I forget, I have to say this so I don't get in trouble. You're one of my mom's absolute favorites to watch. So she has been waiting for this episode specifically.
Why isn't she on? She should be on with us.
She should. You're right. She has been on the show. We did a mother-daughter sort of softball moms episode a few years back, but she'll be tuning in. I'll tell you that. She'll be thrilled with the shout out.
What's your name? What's your mom's name?
Marie.
Marie? Sorry I missed you this time, but next time.
Yes, she's going to love that. She's going to love that. I'm sure she'll be bragging to my dad about it as well. But also we've had some other folks I mentioned to you before we jumped on. Some other Wolverines. Samantha Finley has actually been on the show. I have also spent a lot of time seeing Jessica Merchant a ton because she's on staff with Stanford Softball, and I cover them a lot down the street. So I'm super excited to get more of that Michigan blood on the show as well.
Well, those are 2 of my, greats that helped make me. I tell them they made me sort of rich and sort of famous. So, but I stay in pretty close touch, especially with Jess. I've been following her career and spent many a time texting after good games and bad games, and for both of us. So I'm a big advocate for all my former athletes. They're all part of the Michigan family.
Yes, they are. And I feel like there's an extended family too, because by the way, it doesn't seem like you're really retired in a lot of ways. This is the 3rd college season since you've been out, but I still see you shagging balls in the outfield, and it's not even just for your former players, it's for their wives. Like Amanda Chittister's wife, Anissa Ortez, was hitting BP, and there you are out in the outfield, and I just love how much you love the game.
Well, I'm ultimately a people person, and I love all the people in the game. I think we have some of the finest people in softball, and they're, good, wholesome, about the right things. And anytime I get a chance to go out on the field, I'll go stop by batting practice, and then Chitty will send the group indoors to the cages, and I'll go out and help her pick up balls because, don't ever think for a minute. People ask me every day, do you miss it? Well, yeah. I'm a coach. I coach my entire career, and I miss the game a lot. I miss being in the dugout. But, so I still come around. I've never really left.
Yeah. Well, and I think in terms of impact, nobody would not feel that for a long, long time, too, in terms of what you've left on the program. I mean, 38 years, that is commitment.
Well, it's a passion. Michigan was my passion. You mentioned I'm an old Spartan, and I'm so thankful that you brought our national championship up. People don't realize because the AIW was in charge of women's athletics until the NCAA finally said, oh, heck, we can't get rid of these women, so let's absorb them. And in 82, they started sponsoring women's championships. But we won that championship my freshman year in college in 76. We drove a bus to Omaha and won out there on a rec field, Dill Field. And the finals were held in UNO's football stadium because we had 2 days of absolute monsoon rain. And of course, they didn't have tarps. They didn't even have field crews, probably. And we won it in a football stadium. So, but I cherish that. And that ring, I have a green ring and a blue ring, and I cherish them both. They're both very special.
Yeah, I did take that into consideration. This is a dark blue shirt, and I got some green nails for you.
That's
So I'm
right.
repping both for you as well
You're as
today.
mixed up as everybody thinks I am, but I'm not. I always root for Michigan State to come in second.
Yeah. That's a fair way to think about it because that is a question that I'm sure you get all the time. Do you feel at this point in your life more Michigan or more Michigan State? But I think you might
Oh,
have just answered.
there's no question. But I'm watching Tom Izzo in the tournament. I watched the women's team yesterday. I'm rooting for them.
Yeah.
No question. I'm a huge Tom Izzo fan. And I'm becoming a Robin Freilich fan. I'm an alum. I haven't met her yet, but boy, I've been really impressed with what she's doing up at Michigan State. So, I'm a big fan of good quality coaches who are quality people.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Your coaching tree is enormous too yourself. So that's been fun to watch. But back to the AIAW championship as well, since we're talking some Michigan State here and your experience as a player. I want to dig into more about how that was the pre NCAA time. It took you 20 years before you finally got your ring as a player for winning that championship. Is that right? You said you have a green one and a blue one, but it took you a long time to get that first one.
Jackie Joseph took over up at Michigan State in, I believe, 1993 or four. But she came back, and the first thing she did was make sure every one of us, she had a nice weekend for us, a banquet, and we all finally got a national championship ring. That was 1995. So, the thing is, back in those days, I speak a lot on, people like to know about Title IX and the whole history of women in sport, which I kind of evolved with it. Title IX was passed in 72. I was a sophomore in high school, and I just kind of evolved with it. We all evolved together. And women weren't considered viable options. We did not have any options to play competitive or organized sport. It just did not exist. Now, I played in a summer softball league that was very organized and very competitive. It was a women's league. When I was 16 years old, I played with people that were 20, 30, and 40 years old. Mary Nutter was my teammate. She was my big sister, and she used to kick my can around the ball field. But we didn't have the opportunities that there are today. And it took a lot of people who recognized as early as 72, 73, 74 that if this was good for the boys, because sport is supposed to be an arm of the education. It's another form of education. I always feel the best classroom on campus was at Alumni Field. Those kids learned more on Alumni Field than they did in any of their classes, barring maybe engineering or something. But it's what it's supposed to be. And we didn't have those opportunities. Keep in mind, women didn't go to college like they do today. Less than 30% of college students were women back pre-Title IX, and that was the whole purpose of the law. The law was passed with no sport intended. We are an unintended consequence. They're like, wow, where are women really underrepresented in education? And it was glaring. Like, we did have people that went to school and went to, law schools, very few of them, but we had no women in sport. And that's where the movement began. And there was a lot of fighting. There was a lot of pushback. The athletic directors were not embracing us, not one single iota. They were like, okay, we have to have, per the law, we have to have sport. We don't have to fund it. And all along the way, I didn't have a college scholarship until really my sophomore year. I got $300 total to go to Michigan State, $100 a term. And I called my mom and I said, Mom, they're giving us money. She goes, well, that's not enough, I said, I know, but it'll be okay. And then little by little, we started getting funded. And, we were lawsuits waiting to happen. And it was my senior year in college that we filed a lawsuit, Michigan State women's basketball. We filed a lawsuit against Michigan State. It just happens to be called Hutchins versus MSU Board of Trustees. I was the team captain and the named plaintiff, but I was not the brainchild. And it was in the works well before I became a senior. And we won hands down, court injunction, because the disparities were just glaring. And so, those were the times. But then male ADs didn't want to fund us. They're like, well, we can't sustain. My own athletic director at Michigan, Don Canham, lobbied Congress. He went to Washington to lobby against Title IX. He said it would ruin college football. Well, I don't think we're responsible for what's going on in college football today. How about you? So it was always a pushback, and lawsuits were the only way to make people change. And you see what we have today. People don't. I speak in classes; they don't even Bleav some of my stories. They don't Bleav them, and I'm like, that's the good news is we've come so far along. People don't remember the past, but people often say, well, we don't really need Title IX anymore. We don't need these laws. Everything's great now. Well, I liken it to a speed limit sign. And you can go as fast as you want on a street you're supposed to go 25. Maybe that's a speed limit sign. You can go 100, but there's a consequence if you get caught and you're held accountable. And without the speed limit sign, without the law, people would do what they want. And if athletic directors were going to do the right thing, they would have been doing it all along. We still have to push and fight. And especially in today's climate, and I mean today, we have to stay vigilant because the money is flowing. It's all flowing to one group. And it's affecting, everybody drastically.
Yeah. Well, you've touched on really the evolution that you've witnessed, which has been over decades. And it seems fitting that this will be our last episode during Women's History Month as well. So to discuss really the true impact of some of these things in the short term and the long term. And then you win that AIAW championship with Michigan State. And then you fast forward and you win the first program east of the Mississippi to ever win the NCAA national championship in 2005, about 30 years apart. That experience, it seems like, was another example of you pushing the envelope, pushing for more, and breaking whatever barrier there might have been at the time. But you said it, Samantha Finley, Jessica Merchant, some of your faves, they were on that team.
Mm-hmm. The one thing they mentioned during the whole series that we were, the only school from the Eastern time zone.
Yeah.
And they kept talking about our time zone. I'm like, we don't care what time it is. Yeah. None of our kids, we weren't trying to break a barrier. I think people, we talk about people who are pioneers, so to speak. While you're in it, I spent my whole career, my first decade at Michigan, I spent every day trying to get them to help get my field ready so I could put a quality practice together. Like, we didn't have any water out there, and fields just get hard like cement, and we didn't groom them, and I would pull the weeds out of the dugout because it was just looked like crap. And I fought with Michigan every day. I was just trying to survive. There is really trying to keep your head above water. And somebody asked me so I had all these other duties. I was a part-time coach. Even as a head coach, I was 50% clerical. I had to be a secretary every morning to our women's athletic director, our SWA or whatever we called her back then. I didn't even get off that job until noon, and practice was at 3. And I had to go out and pull the weeds and try to find a way to soften the field. And I had a part-time assistant. She had a full-time job elsewhere. People say, Dave Revson asked me this in a Big Ten interview. He said, how did you have time to really, hone your craft and study opponents and do all the things you do in coaching? I said, you didn't. I get to practice and be like, what are we going to do? Let's do this. Let's do that. We were just trying to keep our head above water. And that was the way it was back then. So many of my colleagues taught classes or maybe they taught in high school and then came to their job. And you think of Linda Wells, a Hall of Fame coach, and I played against her for a while. She's a little bit older than me, and she coached so long at Minnesota. She coached basketball, volleyball, softball, and taught classes and taught. I mean, I'm like, how did you have time to sleep? You know? And so that's the way it was. And you know what, though? We weren't running around complaining. I mean, at some point, we realized that until we really resisted, and I would say that it's not like it hit me in the head or hit somebody in the head, but we just recognized that the inequity was glaring, like we did at Michigan State by my senior year. The guys, we were in a locker room in the IM building. That was our basketball court. It had dead parts of the floor and a drip in the ceiling. And our locker room was the main IM locker room. So all the women who take classes, had swimming classes, would walk through the locker room on the way to the showers. While we were in the corner of the locker room, they put us in a corner of the locker room for the women's basketball team. So we had a locker.
Right.
In our halftime speech, people would parade through going to the showers. You can't make that up.
Well, that's the other part that not everyone realizes, that you played basketball as well in college, not just softball.
Back in my day, I want to say the women's athletic department probably had 50 or 60 women. And most of my friends played 3 sports: field hockey, volleyball, softball, or field hockey, basketball, softball. It was very common, you know, and obviously the seasons were different. We didn't have fall training for softball and, you know, those kind of things. But, you know, I loved, and it was such a great experience for me. I was 2 different. I mean, I thought I was an all-star basketball player, you know, in high school. I went to high school with Magic Johnson. He was a sophomore when I was a senior. So anyway, we had, you know, we didn't have nearly the same experience of any type, but I loved basketball. When I got to college, I really wanted to play basketball. And of course, I wanted to play softball, but I was a much better softball player. So I was kind of like an all-star softball player and a role player in basketball. It's really 2 different experiences that I wouldn't trade for anything at all. I mean, it was really, I wish kids in today's world, it's really, I don't recommend they do it in college with the rare exception, but in high school, I wish these kids would play every sport they could.
Yeah.
I love the kids that played more than one sport. And some of my best athletes, like Jessie Merchant, you know, she was a heck of a basketball player. And I've had some great athletes that were volleyball players. And, you know, it's just good for them. It's good. And it's good not to train and grind 12 months a year doing the same thing.
Yeah. Do you think it ultimately made you a better coach because you had more different type of experiences like that?
Well, I don't know if it made me better, but it certainly impacted my view of the world for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you have that experience as a role player in one sport, and then you have the experiences, okay, you're playing all the time in another sport, I'd imagine you'd be able to understand or relate to different players in different types of roles on your team.
Well, I certainly speak about that a lot when I teach leadership, how important you have to value everybody in the program has a role.
Yeah.
The star roles are more fun. Everybody wants to be the star. Everybody values the star. But as I say, when I go into the operating room, I want the best surgeon, but I really value the person who sterilized my the room so I don't get an infection or something, you know, and
Yep.
the people who put the anesthesia in you or whisk you down the hall to your bedpan. So, you know, but those are a lot of things that at the time you probably didn't love. After a basketball game, they always give you the stat sheet. The only stat I ever looked at was how many minutes I played. I'm like, oh, gee, I didn't play today. So, you know, I was like a typical kid. I wanted to play, but I definitely, I knew I wasn't one of the best players. So I handled that better. Come from 6 kids, and I'm at the number 5 spot. So I'm used to hand-me-downs.
That's right. What ultimately made you choose for your coaching career softball over basketball?
Honestly, I always thought I'd be a basketball coach. I wanted to be a basketball coach. I dreamed about even in college, you know, I just education major and thought I'd teach high school and coach basketball. And that was really one of the most important people in my life. My mentor was my gym teacher, basketball coach. And I think she helped me through life. She impacted my life so greatly. But my network was in softball. And one of my buddies had gone down to Indiana, and I'd played against her. She played at Western Michigan, and she worked for Gail Blevins and worked at Indiana. And she called me and told me that she was done. She'd gotten her graduate degree, and she goes, the job's going to be open. So I applied for it, and Gail interviewed me. Now, Gail wasn't the legendary Gail yet. She was still creating her own legendary career. But I went down to Indiana. I'd never left. I grew up in Lansing, Michigan. I lived at home my first 3 years of college until I finally had enough money to live in an apartment and get out of my mom's basement. And I never left home. So it was really a great experience for me to move away and be on my own and have all these responsibilities. And Gail tried very hard to train me, but I wasn't, she helped me a lot. Let's put it that way. And tolerated a lot. So we went on to be lifelong friends. I consider the opportunity to work for her the greatest thing that ever happened to me. She taught me a lot.
And when the Michigan opportunity first opened up to join the staff, what did your Michigan State heart at the time tell you, and why did you say yes?
My Michigan State heart didn't even miss a beat.
Yeah.
I applied for the job. I saw it was open. And Michigan at that point in time was very behind all schools as far as the powers that be in the state of Michigan. We were very state oriented back in those days. Were Michigan State, Grand Valley, and Western Michigan. Those were the powers of women in sport, basketball, softball, so forth. Michigan, Don Cannon was the athletic director, and he was absolutely anti-women. So, but it was an opportunity. And truth be told, I was the number 2 pick. And one of my best friends is Kathy Strahan, who was for a long time the head coach at Sacramento State. And Bob had offered her the job. And she turned it down. She wanted to move her life dream was to move to California. And so she said, no, I'm going to move to California. And she got a job out there. And so he picked me. I was number 2. So, and I always tell people, Bo Schembeckler was number 2 also. So it's, I didn't care. But no, I was thrilled to have an opportunity to coach. And I didn't know much about Ann Arbor. I didn't know much about the University of Michigan. But I was coaching softball in the Big Ten, and I was thrilled. So it didn't bother me at all. Still doesn't bother me at all.
Oh, yeah. Things play out as they should. And I think the softball gods knew what they were doing.
Well, it all worked out.
Yes. One thing that is very cool about the Big Ten is how many women lead the programs and have led the programs in the Big Ten. You mentioned you missed a call from Rhonda. I remember having Rhonda Ravel on this show, and she talked about your guys' friendship, but also that competitiveness that goes on the field and the friendship off the field. But that community seems like a very cool, inspiring, and just positive community, specifically the women in the Big Ten within this softball community.
Well, I agree. I've always felt that in the Big Ten, we were pretty special in supporting the fact that our number one goal as a conference was to keep our conference competitive.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, especially with our location, and as the SEC evolved and so forth, it's ACC's evolved, everybody's evolved. It isn't a ginormous challenge, and we have to work together on it and keep a lot of decisions that we make have to be not just what's better for Michigan, not just what's better for Rhonda's Nebraska team, what's better for the conference.
Yeah.
And we were always pretty good at that. We stuck together, and we didn't just do what's the best for us. And I think we have some challenges in today's world, and we need to stick together. But yeah, and largely women. And people ask me if why that is, and I said I don't know. I think athletic directors in our conference, and we've always been about education. We have tremendous schools that are very academically inclined and research institutions, and I think that we understand that we want to have great, strong role models in place for all of our students. And there's a lot of great women. I mean, only women play women's softball.
Yeah.
I would say only women play women's basketball, only women play women's volleyball. Now, they're all very similar sports to some of the men's sports, but we're good enough to play the sport. I would think we'd be good enough to coach the sport, but we have to have the opportunity. And it's been one of my tenets was we are going to find strong women because I want to give women opportunities. And that is not at all to say that men haven't impacted our game greatly. We have some great males in our sport who I respect and have done a lot for our game and understand it's a women's game. And I've always appreciated the guys who say, well, this is a women's game, and how I approach my women and how I approach my colleagues. So there's a lot of great guys.
Yeah. Yeah. But speaking of women getting opportunity, after 38 years, a good chunk of that you were with Bonnie. She was on staff with you at Michigan. But to pass the baton, as they say, I know you are very, very supportive of her taking over the program. Why is that kind of women supporting women concept so important?
Well, I first of all, Bonnie, I think I knew when Bonnie was on my team as a player that she would be the head coach at Michigan one day. Now, I didn't think she would succeed me. I thought I'd be gone before then and that somebody else would take it. But Bonnie's passion for Michigan supersedes anybody I've ever met at this university. And her passion for Michigan softball. And the reason for all those wins and any successes, I can only credit her and Jen Brundage largely. I mean, we've certainly had some people before them. Carol Bruggeman was one of my first assistants. But, the success we had at the national levels was right when Bonnie came in as a recruiting coordinator, and somebody was so invested in Michigan softball. But, to go back to the other thing about women supporting women, I always feel that, for us to stay relevant in our own sports or in any level, CEOs, companies, I mean, we only have 6 Division I female athletic directors in the Power 5, and I think that's down to 5. After Heather Lake left Pitt, I do think there might only be 5 now. But if women don't support women, why do we think the men are going to support women? Men hire out of their own networks. And I say that about athletic directors. You say that about, I don't know, all things. Like, I was so impressed when John Beeline, our former basketball coach, men's basketball coach, tremendous coach, and he went to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he took with him, you know who his assistant was? Lindsay Gottlieb. He had Lindsay Gottlieb as the assistant. And then she left that finally, and now she's the head coach at USC, doing a fantastic job. So that's a rare instance. But I don't see women getting called up to take any positions on the men's side. And a lot of women would be just as capable. Right. And people, I remember a male AD, one of my ADs, only had 9 ADs. And we were looking for a basketball coach. And his comment to me in passing in the hallway one day, we were talking about it, he said, I'm going to get the best basketball coach out there. And I looked at him, this is a while ago, and I said, oh my gosh, are we going to interview Pat Summitt?
Yeah.
And he laughed. Oh, funny. But we think nothing of,
right,
the other way. So if we don't support women, all women in softball, all women in basketball, doesn't mean blind support. If somebody's inadequate. I'm not suggesting that. I am suggesting that there's a lot of people who are very adequate, who are very qualified, and get overlooked because too often leadership traits are still identified as male traits.
Yeah.
And leadership traits aren't pink or blue. They're leadership. You're a good leader or you're not a good leader, period.
Right. And you've been vocal about these types of things and just what you think, like you said earlier, for the bigger picture, not just for, Michigan and what's going on in your immediate world, but the Big Ten, softball across the board, women's sports. Why is it important to you to leverage your position that you're in now to be vocal?
Obviously at some point in time, maybe when we won the national championship, I was certainly enjoying being successful. And I recognize that I have a platform that others don't have to speak out. Because when you speak out, you can really irritate some people, like athletic directors, college presidents, I don't know, the public. And a lot of people are very vulnerable. They're earlier in their careers. They'd like to take a stance, but they're not comfortable that they'll be supported. And I got to a point when I'm like, I'm not too worried about that right now. I feel there's a lot of people. Pat Summitt was very good at it. Tara Vanderveer was very good at it. And they should be, because they were in a position like Muffet. I love Muffet, to speak out. But if I didn't speak out, who's going to? And there's a few people in our field that could. There's a lot of men that could speak out. But it doesn't mean you're untouchable.
Right.
You have to choose your words. But I felt very strongly at some point that I have a platform and I'm going to use it.
Right. And it feels like things have only evolved even more in recent years, just in terms of the sports landscape, women's sports, softball, all of it. And I remember when I reached out to you to do this, you asked about what type of topics we would cover. And you're like, because I have some in mind too. So what are some of those top of mind topics for you?
Well, since we're talking about softball, which is, of course, my favorite sport, and I think has the ceiling we haven't come close to.
Yeah.
We still get higher ratings. People love college softball, yet we are playing in the middle of winter. We are spending ginormous amounts of money. A school like Michigan has been on the road for 7 weekends straight.
Yep.
We are now looking at playing at home this weekend. Yay. The sun's out, but it's a little chilly. And I say we get rid of February. We start playing, then some of us in the cooler areas would travel in March somewhat and play 2 to 3 weeks later into June.
Yeah.
It would save so much money. And at this point in time, we are at a huge, you can call it a crisis. Budgets are being slashed right and left. There's not enough money when we're going to give $20 million a year to football. That's $20 million out of our ginormous budget. We're cutting budgets. We're talking about a lot of sports that are going to be cut, gutted, dropped. Period. We need to move the entire sport. And you can say, well, the SEC has good weather. Who are they going to play? Who are all these teams going to play?
Right.
We don't want the mid-majors to be cut. We don't want the Big Ten to be compromised. We have too much going for us, and we could be the premier women's sport. They have decided to champion volleyball and basketball, but we are not that far behind.
Yeah.
But I can tell you right now, college athletic directors are not sitting around in May and early June watching the College World Series to see how fan-freaking-tastic it is. They're not. They're like, okay, football and basketball over. I'm going to take a break, and then we'll start over. We need to get some champions in the room to recognize what this sport could do. the kind of monies. I mean, even though we reinvented how we get funding from the NCAA to, now women can make money in the women's basketball tournament. It's the first time ever for every win they're going to get, as they call them, units to get paid. We didn't do that for years, but every men's team did. The ceiling, we haven't touched it yet.
Yeah.
There's so much more that we can do to be the business that they keep saying we don't make any money. Well, you don't make any money if you don't invest in it. I believe strongly in we need better investment and riding the Caitlin Clark effect in every sport. So we're at a crux, and I feel very strongly that. And I was talking to an administrator this weekend who she's like, the softball needs to get it going. We got to move the season, or we're gonna be in bad shape.
As somebody who's from California and who played collegiately in California primarily, I didn't fully appreciate what other schools went through in terms of travel, in terms of logistics, particularly in the preseason, until I started covering it from a broadcasting perspective and actually talking more with the coaches, players, etc., and what all goes into it. And there are interesting other sort of ripple effects that could come from moving the season back too. I think of it as at Stanford, we were on the quarter system. So we would be in finals during the World Series.
Right.
They have been the past couple of years. For those quarter system people, which isn't just Stanford, of course, Washington, UCLA, Oregon, plenty of schools who have that as well. They're in not only still in school, but in some of the hardest parts of school, while other schools, semester schools, get to just play softball. That would solve that, right? If you shift the season a little bit, then everybody's kind of playing postseason, just getting to focus on softball. Like, there are so many unintended benefits, I think, on top of exactly what you're talking about too.
Well, and the fact that people like Michigan, my stadium is gorgeous. It's still one of the premier in the country, and we fill it.
Yeah.
Fill it. It's harder to fill when it's cold.
Right.
We'd be at home more. We deserve to be at home.
Yeah.
I mean, Oklahoma is claiming $4 million in revenue last year, and they had 28 home games.
Right.
The Big Ten, they're getting between 10 to 15 home games total.
Right.
Wrong. We all need home games. It keeps you viable. And everybody needs them.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about driving revenue and, like you said, building
Correct.
the sport. All of those things are factors.
Yeah. So I'm making a plea to let's go.
Yeah. How do you think
being matters?
It does. Being at home does matter. They don't call it home field advantage for nothing.
Right.
How do you think conference realignment affects these things?
I'm going next week out to Oregon to watch us play. And once I booked out a flight, I'm not traveling with the team. And I thought, wow, I'm excited to go see Oregon and their facilities, but I'm not going back. It's too hard. It's nuts. And nobody asked us. Nobody ever talks about us. All they talked about is football and the monies it will bring in. But the monies it's bringing in, are we seeing any of it? I don't know.
Right.
Are we really seeing it? We say, well, you still have your sports. Well, it's not my sport. It's the University of Michigan's sport. It's not like, well, you wanted to have a sport, so this is what you got to do. I don't know that I think Stanford coming east to play. They were at Notre Dame this past weekend. I see they go play at Boston College in a few weeks, and then the ACC tournament's at Boston College. So I'm imagining they'll just stay for the week.
They are. Yep, that's right.
I mean, and that coming here to play, I mean, I would schedule all my UCLA when we're home against them like at noon, 11 a.m. So that's 8 a.m. their time.
Right.
Right. And it's just none of it makes sense to me. And you can say, well, there's a lot of money involved, and all they talk about is money. And then we wonder why it's all about money, because that's all they are talking about. When I say they, who is they? The NCAA is the member institutions. That's what the NCAA is. It's the college presidents and the college athletic directors. They are the NCAA. So we can't complain about the NCAA because they're not like some foreign entity.
Yeah. What do you think? Obviously, a lot of different aspects in play with different sports. There's a lot beyond just softball. But for our sport to move in a positive direction, there's a lot of chaos in today's game and the landscape, like you said. What do you think we need to focus on to continue in the right direction?
Well, I don't know if I can go beyond the fact that Michigan needs to be playing at home several more weekends,
Yeah.
as Nebraska, and what's happening is it's pulling towards just a smaller group of people,
Yeah.
and we want parity. What you want and what we want in women's basketball, you don't want to see just the top 16 always win. You want to see the upsets, and I see we're losing it even in the men's game.
Yeah.
There is no more Cinderellas because we already everybody stole Cinderella, and now they're on the Power 5 teams, Power 4 teams,
Right.
right? And there is all that chaos and portal. And I was with some of our coaches last night talking about these kids sign a contract and they can just walk away from it. Like, where are the repercussions? When is one of the coaches going to sue a kid for leaving? I built my team around you and you dropped out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's one thing to say you can always transfer. There's certainly a lot of times it's not the right fit, but that we all know that's not the problem. We don't even know. They don't even wait to see if the shoe wears in enough and fits right. So there is a lot of chaos. It's very chaotic. People say, aren't you glad you got out? I feel bad that it's such a mess. It's difficult. It's never been harder to be a coach.
Yeah.
And try to mold your team, build a team, hold a team accountable, because that's how you win championships. You push them to their edge. You support them through and put them into adversity, because when you learn to overcome adversity, then you learn how to win. And it's a lot harder than it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you were trying to make sure the field was prepped when you first started. Now coaches are having to deal with transfer portal during the postseason. It's interesting how many other things outside of just core coaching is going on.
Well, some of the newest head coaches who came from maybe being an assistant have said, I feel like I never coach.
Yeah.
Like you don't. You're like more like a CEO or one of those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
CEO, GM. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is, no matter what, when I think back, what I miss every day, especially during this time of year, I miss coaching. I miss leading the team and being in the dugout and calling time out and going out and figure out how to pump up the pitcher.
Yeah.
Usually I try to piss them off because I like an angry pitcher. Take it out. So that was more my mojo.
Yeah. Yeah. Angry pitchers are dangerous. It's a good point.
Oh, yeah.
They're dangerous. Yeah. Well, this sort of leads me into the way I wrap up with everybody is a game called Safer Out.
Oh, no.
And so right. you get to be the umpire, but basically I'll just bring up a topic. If you like it, if you agree with it, you call it safe. If you don't, then you'll call it out.
Okay.
So we've touched on a couple things already, like conference realignment and those types of things, but NIL, Safer Out.
It depends on if you mean true NIL. True NIL. I can use my name and image likeness to teach pitching lessons because I'm the best pitcher in the conference of the country, and I should be able to make more than you because you're not. I think that is absolutely appropriate. We were handcuffing kids for years, telling them how they'd have to fill out a form for the NCAA to get a summer job.
Right.
So I believe in true NIL. I don't believe in collective NIL. So out.
That's
safe out.
Gotcha. That's what I was about to ask you too. What is true NIL versus not true NIL?
NIL is literally kids being able to work and get the going rate for somebody of their value, which I know now they're going to value them, but I'm suspect about that. But yeah. Okay. True NIL is being able to be an athlete and work.
Yeah. All right. That was the first one. Okay. Second one is transfer portal. Safer out.
Out.
You just said it. It's tough as a coach when you're trying to build your team.
There's no building. You build a team every year now. I mean, you see too many people. Look at our men's basketball team. They went from being 8 wins and last in the conference to, Sweet 16 and 7 new kids.
Yeah.
So it's different. Adapt. People are like, well, get over it, adapt. Well, this is true. And so I'm the old school. I mean, I love the kids who love Michigan, and we built our brand on you play for Michigan. This isn't about you. This is about Michigan. So I struggle with that, but I still Bleav that there's a place for everybody, and it's not always the place you chose.
Yeah.
But I think it's become reckless.
Well, that's what you said, true NIL. It's almost like a true transfer experience versus the portal is more free agency now than anything else.
It's free agency. It's looking for greener grass. And people don't realize that at least 50% or more of these kids don't land. They go in the portal and they don't land.
Yeah.
Most of the kids that land, they were ready and they were on the hook and ladder before they went in.
Mm.
I had many a coach call me while I was still working. Hey, you have any interest in a pitcher? I got a pitcher from a certain conference. And without naming them, they'd want to know what kind of opportunities I have. And because she's going to go in the portal tomorrow. I'm like, well, once she goes in the portal, have her call me, whoever it is. But I'm not doing backdoor deals, which, bite your nose to spite your face or something like that. So I didn't want people that wanted to be backdoor. That's not my kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Last one is bat flips. Safe or out?
Backflips, like
No.
you hit a home run, or the coach or the kid?
The kid, bat flip, flipping the bat if they hit a home run. Yes.
Oh, bat flip.
Yeah.
I thought you meant bat flip. Not safe. I don't care about that. Good for you. We need kids to be more confident and cocky these days. They go 9 for 10 and they strike out on number 10, and then they're woe is me.
Yeah.
So go ahead and throw that bat. I don't care.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although a backflip would be a pretty crazy bat flip if they did that.
I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've seen a coach do it, I think.
That's insane. Yeah.
Yeah, very.
Well, thank you so much, Hutch. I mean, I if I could, I'd talk to you for hours and hours. But I really appreciate you coming on. It's not very many people that can say they're in the Hall of Fame for both Michigan and Michigan State, but I think even more importantly, there's not a lot of people who can say they've impacted as many people and women as you have. So I appreciate what you've done for the game and appreciate you taking the time today too.
Well, it's fun to chat and air out all my thoughts, and and I just walk away and go play golf.
Yeah. Go play golf and then go enjoy the home opener, right? That's a good life, good retired life.
Yep. It's all good. Well, I appreciate you having me. So we'll continue to keep fixing the world.
Yes. That's obviously what we're solving here.
Well, let's get that season moved back. That's number one.
Yeah. Having Hutch on the show was not only obviously a bucket list item, but it was also just a gift to women's sports and softball communities and the Bleavers out there, and even just to myself to be able to do this. And of course, my mom. I earned some brownie points after having her favorite on and getting her a shout out on top of it. Mama, we made it. Now with that, let's bring it home. You've been listening to Bleav in Softball, part of Bleav Network and presented by Bet Online. The show is available anywhere you get your podcasts, wherever you listen, including Bleav.com and YouTube too. Subscribe to the show, rate the show, and if you liked it, write a review for it. Follow us on X and Instagram at Bleav in Softball. Again, that's BLEAV. You can reach out to me personally on X at Jenna Becerra01 and Instagram at Jenna Becerra as well. As always, thank you for tuning in and catch you soon.